Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. JC here with another video on Action Taimanin. Today we're gonna check another VR builds and tips, but before we start, don't forget to leave a like, share and subscribe if you need the content. So, I'm going to show you a critical build that you can use in VR, you can use in Total War, and you can use in any other kind of content that uses team battles. It is overkill for sure because we're using as many synergies as we can. You don't need all of them. There's gonna be some limited supports or weapon, and you don't need every single piece of gear that I'm showing, but you can do this if you have them. That's one thing. Another thing to take into consideration is that this strategy is actually not good for Worm Knight. It is best used against Queen Arachne, LWS Squad, and Thank You. On the other hand, Taimanin, Worm Knight, and Queen Kanaloa are not great targets for this. Why? Because this is going to be hyper offensive, and that means that we are pretty squishy. Worm Knight has a period of time where it's immune to debuff, and that's going to reduce the performance of the build. And she's pretty fast, and she puts a lot of traps, so she's going to constantly deal damage. It's pretty likely that you die if you use this build. So try not to use it against this specific enemy. The same can be said about Master Manning. She's gonna need to face to use a control strategy. You need to use a control strategy against her rather than a hyper offensive strategy, because even if you deal enough damage, she already has critical resistance, extra critical resistance on the first stage. So yeah, try not to do that. And Queen Kanaloa has immunity to one side of the spectrum, to either melee or range, and that's going to reduce your damage output, and it's counterproductive for a hyper offensive strategy. So keep that in mind. Now, let's go to the build. We're going to go to step 71. And first of all, we have Making a Splash. Making a Splash is going to be useful because our main damage dealers are demon type characters, and they gain extra critical damage and extra critical rate. Super useful. The main attacker is Astaroth. She's going to be using AXXR Lost Drive, which reduces the critical resistance of the enemy by 30% for 0.5 seconds when hitting the enemy with Hellblaze. Also, this increases the area of effect of Hellblaze and also its duration by 30%, and it increases critical rate by 35% for allies within range. So you gain extra critical rate just by using this. It's amazing. So the weapon is 4 out of 5 plus 15 with anti-human wind Magatamas. The Magatamas can be whatever element. As for the sub weapon, it's going to be 5 out of 5 plus 15, whatever Magatama, whatever weapon, honestly, it's fine. Then we use Hellblaze with Fire Blast and Lava Serpent. The only skill that you actually really want is Hellblaze. Fire Blast depends on context. If you want to be near the enemy, you use Fire Wave. If you want to be far away from the enemy, you use Fire Blast. And the last skill, you could equip Phoenix Dive or Flame Haze because they synergize with the Terror, but they put you next to the enemy, and that's not nice for Astaroth. That's why I use Lava Serpent. Then we have a bunch of supporters here. A ton of them are going to be limited, but as I say, don't worry. If you want to substitute some of them, it's completely fine. Most of them you don't need. Only some of them are going to be essential. Azusa is probably one of the essential ones next to Threshold Astaroth. So Azusa, Sword Dancer Azusa, what does she do? When doing critical attacks, increase penetration by 14%. Upon attacking an enemy, reduce their critical resistance by 20% for 5 seconds. So that's another chance to increase, another way to increase your critical rate chance. It is pretty good. We put this on the main because it also gives critical damage increase, which is very useful if we're gonna do a crit build. Then we have Threshold Astaroth, which increases damage by 12.3% per machine type ally, and increases character's critical rate by 12.3% per demon type ally. So that means that Astaroth is gonna have on this team 24.6% critical rate increase and 12.3% damage increase. And this counts as buffs. They present to you as buff above the character because they are conditional. That's the reason why they are treated as buffs. But they are permanent, which is really, really useful. And that's why we're using Melt. Melt is gonna give us 10% damage increase per buff. And just by using these two, you basically have a 30% damage increase effect. That's a Stella effect. Pretty good. But not only that, we're also going to use another one, another buff with Sledge of Blessing, which is gonna be a Susune effect. Pretty useful. Nice, right? But not only that, we're also using Bouquet Sword, which gives us two buffs. That's a 70% damage increase. That's kind of a... what's the name? I forgot about the name of this girl. That's kind of a Fuyutsuki effect. That's pretty aggressive, guys. I mean, you're gonna see like 9 buffs on my character. So yeah, these can be just disgusting, devastating. It's amazing. So let's check. For the customs, we have these stats because Astaroth has a ton of customs. And for the stat training, it's maxed out because it's Astaroth, one of the best farmers in the game. Then, let's check the other demon type character, Annerose. She's a supporter slash sub attacker. So she's going to be using, of course, Bouquet Sword, as I mentioned, because that is going to give us a buff that increases critical rate by 50% and damage by 20%. Then we have Devour, Action Bound, and Darkness. Action Bound to increase critical rate, damage, and defense. Darkness to deal a ton of damage and apply the buff. Devour to heal. As simple as that. For supporters, we use Worshipper Lapis, which is going to give us, which is going to give the enemy a debuff, and give the whole party extra critical rate when using demons. It is extremely useful. Then we use Bright Annerose. Bright Annerose is going to increase critical damage and give us a small buff if we don't crit, which is going to help us because we're also using Kana. By comparison, she is going to have less buffs than Astaroth because she doesn't have Threshold Astaroth. That's too buff to take into consideration. But even so, this team relies heavily on buffs. That's why I use these two, Kana and Melt. Stats of the customs, stat training, and let's check Emily. For Emily, we're going to be using Sledge of Blessing. We already know that. Because Sledge of Blessing is going to be buffing the whole party. 5 out of 5 plus 14. Whatever Magatemas, anti-human Magatemas, of course. Whatever weapon, 5 out of 5 plus 14. Whatever Magatemas. We use Gravity Hold to heal, Homing Bullets to deal damage, Healing Field to heal the party. I mean, you can go with Ground Shocker, yeah, and Drone Shocker, but I prefer not to. Just cause. Then, I use Mirabelle to increase the damage of the main attackers, along, of course, with Haru, and Felicia, just to give a big damage increase to this character. Stats of the customs, stats of the stat training, of course, max out. And now, let's do a quick run. Honestly, it's pretty simple. You might die again against this specific enemy. It's not the best target for this, but it's doable nonetheless. And something to take into consideration is the duration, or well, the skill cooldown. You see that it's pretty long? That's the reason why we want to see the whole animation, so that we are able to reduce the cooldown as much as possible. Unfortunately, we also lose the buff, but it's fine. There, perfect. And I also use this. And you see that I'm not critting right now, right? Well, that's because Lina is alive. The moment I kill Lina, the moment this is going to crit a lot. So yeah, I'm critting a ton now. Even without the Hellblaze, I'm critting. But whenever I do Hellblaze, it constantly crits. And yeah, it's easy. Extremely easy. Because of how aggressive the build is. As I mentioned, these rely heavily on buffs. We have a ton of synergies in place to make Melt and Kana give a huge amount of damage. Honestly, these can be just disgusting. And that's why we want to use them on this build. If you don't want to use Kana, that's fine. Melt was F2P, I mean, you should. But if you don't want to use Kana, just go with Arabella. Arabella is perfectly fine. You can also go, depending on the enemy, with one of the big three. Of course, the big three are the best options. But the problem with Haru is that you have to put it on the main to get the damage increase. But you can go with White. White is the other option against anti-human. So, yeah, that's about it, guys. I hope you find this useful, and I'll be seeing you next time. Bye!